Good evening. You are listening live to the Xtreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob. Alongside me tonight, I have Professor Pixel. May have some guest stars joining us in a moment because tonight we're going to be talking about the 2021 recent release of Dune, the Frank Herbert sci-fi classic, having to deal with spice and a whole hell of a lot of characters and subplots. And oh my gosh, it's like a man's soap opera, if you will. So some people love this film, Pixel. Some
Yeah.
people hate it, and I fall into the category of going, you know what? This is visually a stunning film, and it's one of the best films I've seen in a long time. And I'm looking forward to talking about it. What are your initial thoughts?
I was blown away. When I started this movie, I wasn't sure that I would like it. The trailers gave me nothing. It felt bland, and it looks like it was going to be just a snore fest. That some people are saying that it is, but it's not. Just the way that it tells the story that it does, starts the story that it does, I should say. And just looking at the movie, from the costuming to the sets to hell, the CGI, it's astounding how beautiful this movie is in general, just period. I love this movie. I went from somebody who didn't even know if I was going to see it to absolutely adoring this film.
Yeah, I think that the way we'll talk about some of our guests pop in tonight, we are also joined by Dalton Authenticator. It's going to be a situation where I just want to talk about the film as a singular piece because I think, comparing it to the 1984 film, the books, everything else people want to rip on it for or compare it to.
Better.
I understand that's a legit
Then-
thing too, but at the same time, I want to be real clear about some of the things that we like or we don't. So Dalton, good evening, sir. It's good to see you again. How are you?
Good evening. Unfortunately, I'm going to, as I was the other night on Comics Division stream, going to be the dissenting opinion on this, because I found it to be the most soulless, plotting, pretentious, overblown schlock I've seen in years.
See, I fall in the camp of really, really liking Malignant, and I know he hated it, and that was pretentious as hell, but he gave it to me, and it was like a whammy. I will agree with you on this, and I wanted to bring up this point here because I think it's a big key thing about this movie, and not even talking about the plot. This guy's visual style, I think, is phenomenal. I do think it's extremely pretentious. Somehow, though, I think it works for me. It's pretentious in a way of like, I don't know, Brian De Palma or maybe Kubrick at his best in a way, but it's something that I like. But is that how you felt about this film, Dalton? Is that how you just normally feel in general about him?
The route that I would go with it, and because we've talked about it before, even before Extreme Movie Show was its own thing. How much I despise the general aesthetic of Christopher Nolan, and the thing about Denis Villeneuve is I think his problem is he wants to be Christopher Nolan so damn bad that he copies all of Christopher Nolan's worst aspects.
That may be true, and I certainly wouldn't argue it because I will plead ignorance to really comparing them, not being overly familiar or looking at it. So if that's something that strikes you that he's doing, I get it. Because in a way, I think there is a bit of familiarity with this film, and that the first two things that come to my mind, and I don't know if this is something that struck you guys, is that I immediately thought of two franchises. The Star Wars franchise, which generally I could care less for. I don't hate on it, but it's childish to me, and it's okay. A lot of people like it. And Lord of the Rings, which I just thought was a slightly better version of it with source material that I seem to prefer, but some people don't like that as well. Well, I'm being honest out here. I obviously
right. I know
cutting edge, but that being said,
you've not left yourself much room to go here. If you don't like Star Wars and you barely like Lord of the Rings, then the entire internet is going to be forming an angry mob in about 5 seconds ago.
So the thing about I understand that Rob's taste doesn't go towards the fantasy like Lord of the Rings or the fantasy of Star Wars, really, because I'm on the camp that Star Wars is more of a space fantasy than it is science fiction. But
as it was intended to be.
yes, this film, I felt I've never read Dune. I never saw the original Dune or the Dune miniseries. I just saw the trailer. I saw the trailer and it looked incredibly dull. I'll admit. But seeing this movie, I was just blown away just how beautiful it is in every aspect, from the costuming to the world that it builds. And this is some of the best world building I've ever seen in a film. Just period.
Okay, but let's actually talk about that for a second, because this is I guess my handicap here, because I have read the books and I have seen every other adaptation of this, and I'm not trying to overly compare it to the other ones, but there is something to be said here for most of the compliments that I see people giving this movie are compliments due to the source material, not how the source material is being adapted here. Because yes, and it's become a meme whenever I bring this up, but yes, Dune is a desert planet. Arrakis is a desert planet. But you know what? So there have been movies set in deserts for decades, and they at least managed to make those deserts visually interesting and colorful. This movie, brown smears, gray smears, washed out naturalistic smears. I'm sick of this. The fundamental issue is I'm sick of this style of movie, and I don't. And even though it might lend itself more to this source material than it does to some others, I just don't want to see this kind of movie anymore. I've seen it with Inception. I've seen it with Denis Villeneuve's other movies. I'm going to be seeing it with Eternals, which is a movie that I should theoretically love, but I'm going to end up hating because it's Denis Villeneuve all over the place. I'm sick of this. Let's make everything so serious and dramatic that color is a foreign concept bullcrap.
I completely disagree.
Color was not a foreign concept.
So we have Comic Corks here. Jimmy, how are you?
What's up, man? I'm doing good.
Hey, good to hear from you again. Yeah, I think that's a pretty strong take there, Dalton. I'll agree with you that at the high level here, you have a certain amount of, I think I've seen this before somehow, somewhere, and you're citing some specific things. Again, not being familiar with those sets of films, I can see where everyone's trying not to take too many risks. Therefore, it may all appear to be the same. But since Jimmy's popped in, let's ask him for his initial thoughts on Dune.
Okay. Mine's going to be a bit rough. So, I think it's the best sci-fi movie in the past 10 to 15 years, while also being on the same scale of phenomenon and scope as Avatar. Because this movie is huge, and no one expected it to be this good, except unless people who knew, like, oh, it's Denis Villeneuve, he's great. Unless they knew that, they didn't think it was going to be this good. I got calls from my brother saying he hates sci-fi, and he said, I think this is probably the best movie I've seen in 10 years, while also being one of the best I've ever seen. I was like, what are you saying? He goes, this is better than Star Wars. I was like, well, that's a bit much. Even though, like me, like I'm not a Star Wars fan.
The sequel trilogy, sure, I'll grant you that in a heartbeat. It's
I don't even count
the
those,
sequel
but
trilogy
yeah.
movies.
So I'm going to say, because I really want to touch upon what was said before about color, because this does take place on a desert planet for most of the film, but color is used throughout it completely. The entire aesthetic of the Freeman who have the blue eyes,
Yep,
how they are adapting to the desert, as it were. The darkness that comes when the sandworms is shown. I don't feel there's a lack of color. I think color, when it's used, is highlighted, like the green of the trees when you see the palm trees, and then when fire comes into play later, it comes through. It pops out at you. I think color was used carefully. I don't think it wasn't used at all.
but I see that as essentially monochromism, because what you have is, eh, when color is used, the entire shot is just that one color, or that one backdrop. Like when the sun shows up, everything is gold. When, it's just the sand, everything is this washed out brown. When, as you were saying, with the trees and the things, and that to me is not a good use of color.
So
Reducing
Whoa,
everything down to
wait, hold on.
reducing everything down to one color per shot, or a predominant color per shot, is not a correct use of color, in my opinion.
it's
Well,
okay if he's
Use
the
of color involves
Rothko of
using multiple
filmmaking.
colors at once.
Well, that is an aesthetic that you don't like. Your taste aren't to, and I understand that. It's definitely not like Barry Lyndon or something that's extremely lush and you have 20
Yep.
colors on there and you're wondering if they're working with a certain primary group or whatever.
Or
I think
Peter Greenaway. Peter Greenaway is my gold standard for use of color in the movie The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover.
Well,
That movie is amazing color-wise.
Well, like, think about it though, real quick though. This is a movie called Dune on a planet that's a desert. What colors did you expect to see? This is not a Wes Anderson movie.
But here's the thing. What Dune is, fundamentally and in its essence, is a psychedelic movie. It's literally a movie about naturally occurring acid that can literally cause its acidy effects to happen in real life. It bends space and twists time and yada, yada, yada.
Well, yeah, that's a small part, though, to the whole story.
The spice is a small part of Dune.
No. I'm saying the psychedelic aspect of it is a small part.
Because it taps into Paul's visions. As we can see, Paul Pixel is my name today. It taps in, Paul is sensitive to the spice. Whenever it gets to him, it triggers his visions because he has visions. And so psychedelic, maybe, you can go ahead and say that because spice is basically a drug used by the people there. But
space acid. Yeah.
Well, no. It's not like when Paul gets his visions, you're not expecting to see 1970s hippie stuff and colors.
Worked for David Lynch, didn't it? And worked for the miniseries.
No, it didn't.
David Lynch, which we talk about all the time. Rob and I talk about David Lynch all the time. We reviewed Twin Peaks here.
Yeah, he does. It doesn't usually work, but for something like Dune that is so baked in 60s psychedelia and metaphysics and religion and spirituality and all of that business, which Frank Herbert intended, to take a franchise and an IP as weird and intentionally so as Dune, and turn it into this Christopher Nolan light bullcrap is just it's insulting.
Let's just pause right here. We understand it. We're not making any progress on this here, so let's just kind of change our path here a little bit. And that's fine that we have dissenting opinions too. And I really appreciate, Dalton, that whenever we have a conversation, you have specifics that you like to back it up. That's one of the things here on the Xtreme Movie Show that I look forward to having with conversations. I'll say this: ever since Prisoners, and I wasn't crazy about Arrival, but he also did, what was it, Sicario? What I liked about it was, in forgetting the color aspect or the story part, was that the much like I always, go crazy over John Carpenter type of shots that I felt he used that just resonated with me. There's something about the way he's able to capture something on scope and scale that I think work, and I think in here it did that. I'm not crazy about all the big ships and all this and that, because to me the story still comes down to people and the effects, and in this case spice. Which I do agree, the whole psychedelic thing to me wasn't really touched on a lot here. Is more about the hero's journey. I want to talk a little bit about two specific things. One thing that I honestly thought that didn't work for me, and it was an actor. And one thing that I thought was kind of neat, just two quick things that popped out. Then I'll ask you guys for some feedback on that, or any things that popped out too. The only thing I really didn't like in here, and I think it was the guy's delivery, even though I think he looks the part and looks legitimate. I really didn't like, was it Josh Brolin in here? The way he was delivering his lines.
Who plays Gurney?
Yeah, I get him being the coach, and working with them fighting, and I thought that was cool. But him talking the way he was talking was something that just, I went, wait a minute, what did I miss here? Take two. It just didn't have that flow to it or like that. Did anybody get that vibe from him or any other character?
I don't know. I felt personally like that Josh Brolin has a certain, you notice the style of his delivery, especially now that I've seen him in Avengers Infinity War and in Deadpool.
Yeah,
And a few other
it's what
things.
he does. Unfortunately, it's
Very.
what you're gonna get with him.
And
So
as a
we get the
person,
same old him that in every movie. Is that what you're saying?
Well,
It does lean into that, but
yeah,
you know, some actors we love for that. So
yeah.
yeah,
I would say I didn't. It didn't bother me because that's kind of what I was expecting. Knowing Josh Brolin was cast, I was like, okay, so he's gonna do what he usually does, and it's gonna kind of work for the character, and that's fine.
I
Um,
am smiling.
I will say that a lot of the actors in general came off as stilted to me, and it's because I think it's because they had to play with this sort of stiff self seriousness that
Yeah, they weren't
it,
smiling.
it just it never comes off as recognizably human to me, and I don't think it works here. And for some of the characters, it could have worked if you had them contrasted with the more human characters. Like for the leader of the Bene Gesserit, having her act like that makes sense. But it only makes sense if you let the characters that are supposed to be recognizably human be recognizably human in the interim, so as to contrast the non-human acting characters.
and that's where I'm gonna disagree. The only character who I think didn't give like a character work delivery was Jason Momoa's Duncan Idaho, because it felt more like Jason Momoa.
Well,
I've read
see,
the book. Hold on. I've read the book
go ahead.
and I'm comparing it, and I'm thinking it felt more like Jason Momoa, but because it's Jason Momoa and how like that's his style of
He's
acting,
carrying the likability
yeah,
angle.
it's carrying the likability of who Jason Momoa is, and it brings it out to make it feel more relatable and human. Timothy Chalamet gives an unbelievable performance with Paul, because I thought they were going to amp up the Chadness, like him being kind of like a Chad, like the book, but no,
Yeah.
he mellowed it down a bit, which was
He-
good. Oscar
he
Isaac,
tried. He definitely tried, and I don't want to bash on him because he's still fairly new at this, and I think he'll get better as he goes on. But my issue is, and again, this boils back down to Denis Villeneuve. I don't think he was given much direction to work with, and so his performance, as good as it was kind of handicapped by the overwhelming Denis Villeneuve-ness of it all. Like my problem with this movie essentially is I think Denis Villeneuve was way more interested in Denis Villeneuve's version of Dune than he was in creating a version of Dune that anyone would actually want to
And
watch.
it is his film and his direction, so that's his take on it. So if David Lynch did this or John Carpenter or anybody else, I would expect it to be one of their kind of films. So I have zero issues with that at all, because I agree. I thought the whole movie, no matter how good it might have looked, the colors, whatever you want to talk about so far, it rises and falls with that main character. And not knowing the story that well, I thought this is a guy that if he's not really consistent all the way through, or he acts like a petulant child or somebody we won't care about, it's not going to work. But it's interesting enough where we can put ourselves in his shoes and say, okay, we know what it's like to be a young man getting ready to take on the world with stuff that's bigger than us that we don't understand. And we'll talk about that scene with his father here in a moment. But Pixel, you look like you want to jump in.
Yes, I have a few things I want to say. One, on what you just said. It's this director's vision of what Dune is. Just like David Lynch in the 80s had his vision.
Lynch did.
There's a conversation that he had with George Lucas, because George Lucas wanted David Lynch to direct Return of the Jedi. And he said no. Why? Because he felt like George Lucas should direct it. It's his story. It's his vision. So if he's not directing it, then it's not going to be his vision. So
he's fishing, Dalton.
And so what we just said, this is this director's vision of Dune. And I understand you don't care for that. I'm saying that this vision that I'm watching was breathtaking to me, and it was great.
Well, here's the thing. I heard it was something around 7 drafts of this script to try to get as close as possible to the story. And so yes, it is his vision, but it's his vision while also trying to be as faithful as possible to the book.
Yeah.
But I think, and the reason I brought that up is I think this version is missing a lot of what I go to Dune for. Like, when you go to an IP, you go to it for what it is. And I think a
You
lot
do,
of
Dalton. That
a
doesn't mean
lot
everybody else does.
but a lot of what it is in this case, I think is missing. And I'm looking back and I'm like, as flawed and broken and lynchy as the David Lynch movie is, I would rather watch that. As low budget as the miniseries was, I would rather watch that. And given that we have other adaptations of this source material to compare it to, I'm left assuming that the stuff I didn't like this time around is left up to Denis Villeneuve. And given that I didn't like any of his other movies so far, I feel like I'm justified in that.
Well,
That's fair.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was just going to say that I think that's fair. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having an opinion like that too. And I think, like I say, knowing why we think something works or doesn't, trying to explore, that's the important thing. I will just say this and then hand it over to you, Jimmy, is that anything going back to the 50s, 60s, or even 5 years ago, we all know they're going to relaunch, reboot it, and almost to this day, especially when things are watered down on television, aren't even going to be anything even remotely resembling the spirit of the original IP. And so I agree, a lot was left out from what I understand too, which is going to bring me up to a question in a moment. But Jimmy, you were getting ready to go on something there.
Yeah, so the things that were changed in this movie from the book to make, I don't know, like they just changed a few things. And I commend a few of them. Like, I thought Baron Harkonnen was going to be similar to the David Lynch version because that is kind of close
that was probably
to the book.
for the better that they changed that.
Well, yeah, exactly. And the fact that Baron Harkonnen is what he is, like I'm okay with that. The Harkonnens I thought would have been a little bit more brutal in their appearance, just in total, because that's how they kind of were in the book. And I appreciate the things that were changed for the sake of, like, okay, we have to make this somewhat believable, because it's not like it's a sci-fi. I mean, it's not like it's a fantasy story, although it somewhat is. It is in our world, just 10,000 years in the future.
Yeah, two things to before we get to the father-son scene, and then talk maybe a little bit about the ending. I gotta say this, and maybe it's if it's trivial, that's okay. We don't have to spend much time on it. But two things. One, for some reason, I've remarked on how good casting can make or break a film. I think some of the films I've seen Dave Bautista in work, and in here I thought he looked tremendous. Now maybe he should have looked some other way. I don't know. I thought for what he had in here, he looked effective, because what's making me think of that was just when I first saw him, I was like, damn, that's really good looking. I wish I had saw maybe a little bit more of that. I understand a lot of the side stuff's getting a very light treatment now, and we'll talk about that here more as we talk about the ending. But at the same time too, when I see someone like, was it Rebecca Ferguson playing the mom? Objectively, I would look at her and go, she's Australian. She looks like maybe a 5, kind of plain Jane, but I don't know. There's something about her. She's got this otherworldly beauty to her in all these movies I've seen. And I thought, I don't know what the deal is with that whole backstory. And I don't know if they'll ever get to it, which I assume that they will if there's another movie we'll talk about. But I thought some of these other things that they put in there, when I said at the beginning, when you guys were joining, one of the key things I said was, one of the things that I appreciated about this film, whether it's a good or bad thing for people that are real hardcore fans and wanted a lot more stuff, I thought it was a lot easier to kind of pick up what was going on. In other words, if you were new and you weren't sure what Dune was, or heard it was done back in the 80s or whatever, and you're watching this for the first time, I felt like it was just enough, especially with today's audience, to kind of go, okay, there's a lot of stuff here that they could go in that direction, and maybe they should or shouldn't have. But I definitely thought that some of these other characters were done pretty well here, including the father, for what screen time he has there. So let's just go around the horn real quick here and talk about that a little bit. Is there anything like that we think we agree on or disagree?
Like I said, I know nothing about Dune. So I'm coming at it from just seeing this movie. And while I am a big fan of sci-fi and fantasy and things like that, I had never read Dune. I heard that it's quite daunting. Like, the first chapter's 200 and something pages.
It's an acid trip of a book, yeah.
But this movie, I could absolutely pick up on the story beats, the characters, and what they were doing. Even though half of the names, now that I'm reading them, I'm like, what the hell is that again? I still love the movie and could keep up with it. And I mean, that's what you were asking. And so, yeah.
I think it kind of goes into a point in Dalton's corner in a sense that, and Dalton, you correct me here if I'm wrong, but I'm thinking of with what you said, and I'm going, they introduce a lot of stuff that could be interesting, even though, like I say, I think this is at best a hero's journey with a young kid, and that was his decision. And then they kind of let a lot of those side things go because obviously the focus is on him in the last half. I think you look at that as a negative, perhaps.
Yeah, it's what I go to Dune for is the metaphysics, the spirituality, the trippy psychedelia, the born out of, Frank Herbert's desire to tell an epic story, but in a modern context. And a lot of that stuff was missing. That being said, in regards to what you just said and what you were just asking, I will have to simp for Rebecca Ferguson a little bit because you called her a 5, and I don't know if you've seen the movie Dr. Sleep.
I have, and that was the first thing that came to my mind. I said there's some otherworldly thing about her that gives her this beauty.
Yeah,
so some of those things you have to put in there, because if you look at two things on a piece of paper, Halle Berry's extremely good-looking woman, maybe an 8 or 9, but I find her to be a 4 or 5.
Yeah,
when
she
I see her
doesn't.
on
She doesn't
screen.
carry it off.
So the
easily.
charisma part that I'm talking about is what I was giving her compliments for. Yes, I thought Dr. Sleep was good. Loved her in the other couple of movies we talked about.
Rose the Hat was who she played in that, and maybe it is just because hat representation and all, but I absolutely adore the character of Rose the Hat, and I wish that movie had made bank so that we could have gotten a sequel, but I guess it never will.
It was a good movie. I did enjoy it. What about you, Jimmy?
I agree.
You sure?
Hold on. Because Dalton said he goes to see this movie for like the spirituality and of course with other things, but I'm like, this movie was very spiritual. It was almost to the point where it was heavy-handed because I can never pronounce the name, like the Aquazi. I'm forgetting.
That's right. Paul is the hardest thing to say.
No, no. Hold on. It is.
1 is the loneliest number.
I have the book in front of me now. I'm going back because I need to remember what the name is. Like the name of him being like the spiritual guy who's born.
Right.
The FatherSon.
Yes, thank you. I can never say that, dude. I can never say that. Like I barely remember the Moadib. Okay, well, hold on. So I gotta get into what I was saying.
He's the space messiah. That's all you have to say.
Yeah, well, yeah, he is the messiah coming in, and like the way he looked at Zendaya, the way he was born, he knows things that other people just can't comprehend. Like when he said, "I know you're pregnant," she was like, "I barely know that. How do you know?" And when he meets Zendaya, and she's like, "I don't believe you're who you are because you're kind of young and like a little bit brash," and he goes like, "Well," and then just leaves it there. And then you saw that glimmer in her eye, like, "Oh shit, what does he know?"
Yeah.
Now I'm thinking maybe, and all you got from that was just body language.
Yes.
And like he knows things that he shouldn't know. Like when he was putting on his suit, he knew the way how to do it correctly.
But we could have gotten all of that and still kept in the acid trip parts is my problem. And
okay.
I think what we mean by spirituality is a little bit different because yes, there's spiritual metaphor and spiritual themes in this, but I'm not talking about themes and I'm not talking about metaphor. I'm talking about literal spiritual things, literal, like the old show don't tell thing. I'm not interested in metaphors and symbolisms and layers of abstraction and show me what you're working with. That's one of the things that makes something like Dune superior to something like I don't know.
Star Wars.
No, because Star Wars is more literal about their spirituality too, but I mean, like,
no, I'm a hater of Star Wars. That's why I bash on it whenever I can.
Well, I suppose that's fair. But there's a difference between movies that actually contain their subject matter and um and movies that only contain it in the abstract. And
Well,
I'm
to be fair,
getting
they did show that. They did show it. When they first met the first sandworm at the spice extractor, and he goes
or in
out
the
there.
pain scene, the
Well,
famous pain in the box scene.
Yeah.
But
Oh, that one was a great one too. That scene's so freaking classic. And
although
like,
honestly,
whatever.
that
But,
scene,
hold
that
on,
scene
that
is good
scene where
no matter which adaptation you're putting it in. Honestly, because every time I've seen that scene, it becomes my favorite scene of the movie or the adaptation.
it is great. But that scene where he goes in and saves the people from the spice extractor because the worm's coming. He gets that acid trip that you kind of wanted, and you got to see the spice around start to flare and turn red, even though he's not touching it or anything. It's just that psychedelic side. And then once he starts having visions right after that, he saw Zendaya, and then he's on his knees, like fully engraced in spice. And then he just heard thumping, and he goes, "I know your stride, old man." And then boom, Gurney's there, and you're like, "Yes, this is what it should be." It was great.
Yeah, I think it was still a little bit on the subtle side for me. I would have preferred something a little bit more universe breaking here and there.
So 2 things. If you really want an acid trip, you can take some acid before watching the movie. We were just talking about Twin Peaks. And there's this, we're on the trippiest episode I've ever seen. And we said this must be what it's like to take drugs, but if you're looking for that, yeah, I mean, you could go recreational if you want, but that's mostly a joke. 2, I'm going to have to agree with Jimmy. I saw the spirituality in it completely. Every moment of his visions, it was tapping into just how it's shot and everything. You can tell that it's different, and you can feel it. I felt it. It's something that touches the core, at least for me. So I felt that. I'm sorry you didn't. And I think a feeling, to me, if something can make me feel like, suck me in, that is far more impressive than just showing me. Because this episode of Twin Peaks that we talked about, while I saw what they were doing, I did not feel any kind of spirit in it.
And maybe that's just a difference between us, because I'm not much of a feeler, as anyone knows, and I think Rob and I have discussed this before. My number one issue with a lot of movies today is they're so emotionally manipulative, and they drag out of you emotions rather than letting them naturally be a result of what's actually going on.
And I think that's the heart of, I'll piggyback on something you said, Dalton, because it's the one thing that I totally agree with you on, as the way films are basically almost all the same, and how they're looking for this and that. It's my whole thing about laugh track and all that stupid shit. But I'm going to go old school. We can talk about the scene, and then I want to talk about the ending as we close up here in a little bit. But for me, as hokey as it sounds, as much as I was like, oh, I see this coming a mile away, it came across as sincere, and I really thought the best scene in the whole movie to me was the father-son scene, because I wasn't sold on whether or not I'm going to like the son. I identify with him, like I say, being as a young man going through the hero's journey and all that stuff, the Joseph Campbell kind of thing, and finding out who you are. I think that's just in all of our DNA. So the emotional thing to me, I think, was really important here, because, again, I'll agree with Dalton. A lot of this movie was kind of like, I like a lot of the stuff here, and I think some of it's interesting, but I don't know how much I emotionally care about it, how much I'm invested in it. That may change if and when they do a sequel or a second film. But for me, him talking to his father, and it didn't get into this big belligerent thing or a shouting match. It was like, yeah, I wanted to be a pilot, and whether you fail or succeed or like that, you'll still always be my son. And I could see that coming from a mile away. But again, that has to be done right. And I thought it wasn't so much on the father, who I thought it was done very well, but that the guy that played this character, I don't know him. A lot of this movie rests with him, with whether or not this whole thing's going to flop or not. Obviously, it's doing great money-wise, financially. That's not what I'm talking about. But for me, once we got to that point early on, I was able to kind of go, okay, I think this movie might make it through, because I had a bit of fear going, God, I hope this isn't like Arrival where I just don't care no matter how good it looks. Whereas Prisoners was a personal movie, and Sicario was kind of cool and kind of dark. So to me, his movies have gotten worse actually up until here. And like you had said, Pixel, I thought the trailer was not. It was mildly interesting, wasn't entertaining. It didn't make me want to see the movie, but the more I
The
saw
trailer was
stills and
just
other
like,
things,
look who's in this movie. We got
yeah,
this actor.
and again,
yeah.
not knowing Jason Momoa and all that stuff, I don't know if I was seeing him or the character or not. So I agree with all that. But for me, let's talk about the father-son scene. Was that really bad? Is that really good? Or just you tell me what your favorite scene in the movie is and why.
I can answer this. I can totally answer this. The best part of the movie, I don't have a best scene, but I have the best part, is up in, I want to say, the right after the fall of House Atreides. And because everything up to that point was, I'm learning. I need to get better. Because he showed the hero's journey. It's not like movies nowadays where just like, this character's perfect right off the bat.
Yeah,
No,
right.
this kid's messed up because he doesn't know what the hell's going on with him. It's like a spiritual form of puberty.
Galactic feudalism will do that to you sometimes, I guess.
Yes. So it's not just one of his parents that were teaching him to be better and actually try to get through this. Both of them were teaching him on different things. The mother, more of the spiritual side, and his voice teaching, and his father with the actual sit down reality of being a leader.
Yeah,
and it was a great. This movie is a great family movie, which in a sci-fi movie we don't get a lot of that. But this was done great because it was like every parent. I'm not a parent, but both my parents taught me things that I now use in my life. And in this, it showed that for him, and it was really, I really like that. But yeah, the hero's journey for this movie is my favorite part.
You brought up something that I actually wanted to touch upon, and that is Paul himself, because as a character, he like you said, he is learning and he realizes he has to do better, but he's still at that point where he's kind of making mistakes. He brings up to what's her name, the representative for the Emperor on the planet, Arrakis.
Arrakis is the desert planet.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Okay, I was making sure because there's a representative for the Emperor on their home planet, the water world.
Yeah, no, I mean on the sand planet. He's saying how he'll go to the Emperor and say he doesn't have any kids, and so he's trying, he's pushing, and she points out, "Who the hell do you think you are?" And I think that does touch him a little bit, especially after that moment. Jason Momoa goes down that hall, and I won't say exactly what happens, but he's going down that hall. But I'll go ahead and let Dalton, if you have a favorite scene of some sort.
I touched on it already, I think, but I'm beginning to think I just like this scene in every adaptation of Dune, because in every adaptation of Dune it stands out to me as my favorite scene. But the box of pain scene, and for anyone that knows any other iteration of Dune, you know exactly what I mean by the box of pain scene. And it's funny, but I really liked what the Reverend Mother who was administering the box of pain test was doing in terms of acting. Honestly, the Reverend Mother of the Bene Gesserit that was doing the freaking box of pain test. The actress, and I don't mean this as an insult, in fact I kind of mean it as a compliment, her performance was reminding me a little bit of James McAvoy in Split when he played Patricia. And again, I know that sounds cheeky and dismissive, but I don't mean it, because I really enjoyed that character when James McAvoy was playing it in Split. That's what that whole scene reminded me of, was Patricia from Split and Glass, but in the role of the Bene Gesserit, giving the box of pain test. It was cool.
You know
I believe
what?
we're talking about Charlotte Rampling, right?
I
Yeah, the
think
older
so.
one doing the one administering the box of pain test, right?
Yes.
Yeah, she's been in a lot of good stuff, and she's obviously very cute. And I will say this because you talked about it before when I mentioned about Rebecca. Um, I do appreciate how in some films an older woman will have a significant or memorable role, and she was, I believe, in a season of Dexter, if I'm correct, and it was pretty good in there too. She's There's not a lot of roles for women like that. We expect them all to look like eights, nines, tens, and just do certain things or
Mhm.
whatever, and that's it. So to have people of different stations and ages in here without it feeling like it's forced or just checking a box, especially when they can deliver their goods. Because I agree with you, she stood out the most to me in terms of intensity. I liked the father, but I loved her performance. If that makes sense.
I think what she was doing, and everyone knows this is my point of reference, but I think what the Bene Gesserit administering the box of pain test was doing was what Tilda Swinton was trying to do as the Ancient One in Doctor Strange, but failed to do.
You know what? You know what's
It
great
failed to
about
pull off.
about that whole scene is it's very early on, and it gives you what many people don't remember. It's a slight foreshadowing to how the movie is gonna be because
Mhm.
she goes, she holds that needle up to his neck, and he's like, "What's that?" She goes, "Oh, that's the Gom Jabbar." And when you hear that, you go, "Oh shit, that must be like a serious thing because it has a name."
Mhm.
Yeah,
So
But not so.
like you could like
that's really gonna
literally.
hurt.
I
Oh,
mean
it's
that's
just a
what.
needle. Oh, it won't hurt that bad.
So that gets you prepared to like, oh, the Gom Jabbar. Okay, there's going to be more things in this movie that have spiritual meaning
Yeah, it's a
than just
world,
this one
folks.
thing.
It's a world.
So my favorite scene is actually the one towards the end, the duel, um, leading up to the duel and the duel itself, and what he has to go through that because he tries to make his opponent yield, and you can see the tribe all around, and they're like, they say something, and the
Is he
leader
taunting
says,
him?
yeah, because and he says how if the boy doesn't know our ways, we do not yield. And so it looks like it's going to, and with how they push towards that scene in his visions and the outcome, I really just enjoy the execution. And that's right before the final walk. That's leading into the next movie. And, I saw, and I know you don't know who this is, Rob, but Dan Slott say something about how, oh, well, a movie, I didn't feel like it was complete, and a movie has to be complete all the way through, and you can't leave it so that way the story is going on.
That's just not true.
Well, hold
That's
on.
just not true.
I wasn't able to see that.
Yeah, well, I don't mean to
Well,
bring up
you may have been spared a Dan Slott-ism then.
yeah,
There.
because
No, but also it's stupid though because you're like, this is an adaptation of a book that is so dense.
Yeah, that's
And that
thicker.
brings
That's
up the
thicker than the
point.
Bible and several times more layered. If we're being entirely honest with
I was
ourselves.
gonna. Well, I wouldn't go that far, but it's so dense to the point where like it's 1/3 of the book. This movie that we got is literally 1/3 of the book.
is it
And
all
if
200 and something pages?
it's 255 pages, but this book is, I mean this movie, if we take just to show how dense it is, if we take everything we learned in this movie and make it 1/3 of the time we watched it and then add the rest of the book, we wouldn't be able to get any story because everything would be coming
Yeah,
at us
no,
so fast.
you can't really do this in one movie, and that is something I will agree with, and that's why I don't quite fault it for being incomplete and for leaving us all hanging, because in order to do what this movie or what this series needs to do in translating Frank Herbert Dune, it does either need to be a ongoing TV series or it needs to be a massive like Lord of the Rings sized trilogy. So maybe, and that's good news for me, because maybe the stuff that I'm looking for in Dune will be in the other two parts and just wasn't in here because they're not ready for it yet.
I hate to break it to you. I don't think they're gonna throw in that psychedelic shit you want, man.
So I'm going to actually disagree with the part that it's an incomplete movie. As it is, it's obviously at the end they say this is only the beginning. And yes, there's more to the journey. But I feel that this movie is about the fall of the most of the House
Atreides, yeah.
House Atreides, yes. About the fall of that and pushing our main character to where he has to join the Sand People, as it were, to find a new place. Like somebody's in the vision, the voice says that he has to die and a new person has to come out of
No,
it.
no, no. Sorry. He said Paul needs to die in
Yes.
order for the
Yeah.
to come out.
The
So-
Queen said Featherek.
Yeah,
So-
I can't do it. Dude. I'm sorry. I'm never gonna remember that name.
Queen
That's what I
said
mean.
Featherek.
No,
It's not
so
that
that scene where he actually, the fight at the end where he goes, is he taunting him? That's more, that there's more to it, because it's like,
Yeah.
no, this is Paul. Paul's never
Yeah.
killed a guy before. This is Paul, like, giving him the benefit of the doubt. And so when he kills him, that's the death of Paul.
That's what I'm saying. So that is this is the death of Paul. That's the end of Paul, and now on to a new journey. And I like I said, I feel this film itself, even though there's more to the story to come, this film in itself feels complete. If there wasn't a sequel, I would be so disappointed. But at the same time, I wouldn't change my love for this movie.
One of the execs, she was asked if there's going to be more, and she said, well, if you watch the movie and see how it ends, I mean,
Yeah, that's just
there's
business
definitely going
crap.
to be more.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah, there's
they'll
gonna
make an
Assuming
announcement,
it
they're just
doesn't
gonna
bomb.
milk it a little bit.
Also, this is Denis Villeneuve. He is the biggest director in Hollywood right now. So I'm pretty sure Warner Bros., since they just lost, they just lost their other big hitter, Christopher Nolan. I'm pretty sure they're going to do everything they can to stay in the Denis Villeneuve business.
Well, I mean, when you get right down to it, there's not much difference between the two of them, and so that's, I guess, a good trade-off.
Actually, there is linear storytelling for one.
Well,
let's end it on that.
unfortunately,
No,
I think
gentlemen.
I think that might work against him. But anyway, brief moment of silence for the fact that Denis Villeneuve is the biggest director in Hollywood aside, because weeping internally. But putting that aside, yeah, I expect they'll finish the trilogy off.
They need
even
to, because
even
this
though
was
there
amazing.
is a vindictive part of me that sort of hopes that it bombs, because there's just nothing here that I liked. But
that's
take
fair,
that
but let's
back.
do this. Let's do this, guys, because it sounds like we're there anyway. Dalton, just continue your line of thinking there, but just any final thoughts about it too. We understand that you don't like the movie; it didn't work for certain
Right.
reasons and all that too. But just overall, anything else that you might want to add?
Okay, the thing is, if you most people who will watch this know my taste and my proclivities. So if you're like me and that you actually want to see the cosmic, weird, metaphysical stuff, you actually want to see it addressed and see the world building and see, to actually have them actualize the stuff instead of just virtue signaling about it for 2 hours. I highly recommend that instead of watching this movie, you watch either of the other two previous adaptations, or better yet, if you want to see a more modern take on what I think this should have been, there's a movie called John Dies at the End that is sort of what this movie should have been, and there's another movie called Naked Lunch that is sort of what this movie should have been. So if you're like me and that you're not feeling the sterile gray-brown stuff that this movie did, would recommend those movies in place of this movie. But if you liked Denis Villeneuve's previous movies, or you're a big stan for Christopher Nolan, or that kind of visual storytelling, if you liked, for example, the movie Gravity, which was another movie that everyone lost their shit over that I hated, you'll like this movie fine. It it's everything that I hate about when blockbusters try and be overblown and pretentious is the problem. And it's far more about Denis Villeneuve sucking his own ego off than it is about focusing on the parts of Dune that I actually like. And
Fair enough
that's
there.
why I
I
didn't
mean,
like it.
that's legit. Pixel, final thoughts?
My final thoughts are, in fact, the opposite. This movie is fantastic. It is one of the best films I've seen in years, and honestly, it might be my top favorite sci-fi of all time, because I don't include Star Wars in sci-fi, but even then, it'd be a real competition, because this movie has, I feel the layers to it. So I think that you should go see this film. If you don't like it, you don't like it. That's fine, but you got to give it a chance, because it was something special.
It definitely makes for some spirited discussion there too, and all. And I appreciate the fact that you guys wanted to join here tonight. So we can't obviously stop without Jimmy giving any final thoughts he has on the movie.
Oh yeah, this movie is possibly one of my favorite sci-fi movies of all time, and I do think it is a hint of fantasy, because the voice and spice in general is very much fantasy. But Dalton, I will address that. I do think not the psychedelic part, but I do think that everything you wanted will be coming soon, because they are about to go to the Fremen Sieges, and that's when, as you
Yeah,
know,
that might do it. That's why I'm not absolutely passing judgment on this movie yet. But that being said, I'm hoping that it gets the trilogy just for the people that like it, so that they can have a complete story, because I
Well,
hate
yeah.
when
Well-
complete stories get cut off. I'm just saying there is a small vindictive part of me that's like, it would be really hilarious if this movie bombed and I got to say I told you so. But that's the vindictive
here's
part of
the
me that I
thing.
shouldn't listen to most of the time.
So to finish this up, though, is this movie's so visually stunning, and I don't think anyone's gonna disagree. It is so visually stunning, but this book and the books following are so dense. It needed to be a series, an HBO series, like Game of Thrones, with that level of budget. But because it's not, and if we're getting a movies, which we are, I do think Denis Villeneuve is the perfect person to do it, because there's just so much that goes on, that he can take the biggest ideas and scrunch it down a little bit to like where everyone can really understand what's going on. And there was more I was gonna say, but I'm forgetting it right now.
So, just small side note, and Rob, cover your ears, because you might lose some excitement for what might come. They are actually, it's rumored that they're working on a series for it, exclusively for the sisterhood, as it were.
That's not rumored. That was
Oh, the
confirmed.
Bene
That's confirmed? Oh, I thought
Yeah, it was
rumored.
confirmed that they're making a series for the Sisterhood of the
So,
Bene Gesserit.
So there's much more to this, and as long as they keep it good, then I'm down. I'm down.
Okay, now I'm excited, because a Bene Gesserit show I would actually watch. That strikes me as the
Yeah,
kind
and
of thing that
they're
would be
trying
right
to
up my
make
alley.
this a giant world that they can dive into. They'll get the movies, and then they're gonna dive into the world with the TV shows. Which the Sisterhood of the Bene Gesserit, I'm not entirely sure that's a starting point that they should go with, but it is still
Dalton
really
disagrees.
cool.
I
Well,
might
no.
agree with Dalton on here as far as that. I would be interested in seeing where that goes. I thought that was probably a very compelling feminine perspective on the world that they could explore a little bit. My final thoughts are, I'm surprised at how much I felt like I enjoyed the movie. It is slick, it is sheen, it is in a style that I do enjoy visually speaking. It was bare bones when it comes to the human element too, despite the father scene, which I thought was one of the best scenes in it. I hope that they don't lose sight of that and go completely bonkers in the next one, but I certainly wouldn't mind some weird stuff and all that. But again, it comes back to, I think, some of those basic questions, not just with the hero's journey, but do I really give a shit, and do I really like or feel emotionally attached by something? And it's a movie, and to use Dalton's term, they got to show me, not tell me. And I thought the music was good. Definitely a very interesting film. It's a very good one. I think it's his best. Like I said since Prisoners, I thought they had gotten worse, actually, for me, despite them having a pretty stunning style. But that being said, check it out. I'm glad to see it because I remember the '84 movie or whatever, and was turned off by it. Was hoping this would be better, and pleasantly I was surprised. That happens rarely. I'd like to thank everybody for listening. Obviously, this is a very special episode here. We had Dalton pop you on. He's a big, long-time fan and a participant here in the Xtreme Movie Show. Dalton, I appreciate you coming over. And I know we butt heads a lot of times, but a lot of times we don't. And so I totally feel like I was seeing both sides of the coin.
It's usually constructive when we find ourselves at cross purposes. We find ourselves having really interesting conversations. So it works.
Oh, and I think like even though we had we butted heads and we got a little heated, I don't think we were ever disrespectful and thought less.
No, it's
No,
just
not at all.
it's just finding ourselves at cross purposes over this particular movie.
Yeah, and Jimmy, obviously for wanting to hop on, I appreciate that too here. RDV obviously does a lot of stuff too here on the Xtreme Movie Show, especially action movies and things like that. We're going to be doing My Bloody Valentine here in a little bit, actually, so we're going to sign off and set up for that. The original 1981 movie, Pixel, I think, may be a part of that as well, and of course, Pixel is showing up. Check us out, guys. We have a new page that I put up there just to generate a little bit more interest because we're actually starting to grow a little bit. It's on Facebook. It's called the Xtreme Movie Show. Make sure you take a look at that. I just post links to what we have. We're trying to actually say, you know what, we've got a bit of an audience now. Now, how can we address it better? So there's going to be some more exciting things to come. So again, I'm your host, Rob. I'd like to thank Pixel, Jimmy, and Dalton for being here tonight, and everybody involved here in Xtreme Movie Show, including you fans. Have a good night. Oh, you're absolutely welcome. Spread the words. That way we get a better audience and one that actually enjoys this kind of conversation where we can butt heads but not fight and take it personal. For everybody here, have a good night. And as always, stay extreme.